Okay. Yeah. I don't think we need to readjust that, do we? All right. So, wow, there's blood or something all over this. Just finished playing Lobositz from the battles of the Age of Reason. This is the first battle in the 7 Years' War. Well, let's talk about components first, because I ain't too thrilled about this one, to tell you the truth. The map is a work of art. There's no question. One of the prettiest, and the texture on it, oh, it's just lovely. These kind of parchment player aids, wonderful. But then it gets sketchy. We got the turn record chart is on a regular piece of paper. Given that there's counters on that and you can bump it easily, and I've done it in this one, it sucks to have that on the cheap paper instead of some of the other charts. We got single roster sheet. You're supposed to mark these up. Got to get your plastic or photocopies or something, or play as I did and don't worry about it. Use the counters. The counters are serviceable. I just think that these would be more helpful overall. Got a lot of interesting charts and tables on these kind of light sheets, things that you have to understand or page through unless you play like I did and said, you know, the hell with the rules, I'm sick of them. They're too hard. Not really, but because they're fairly intuitive, but you know, I can't remember all the stuff in them, so close is good enough in general, which is a shame, because the point of this system, I think, was to get this really, really detailed, excellent game where, like, every single little aspect of movement and firing and everything is covered in the most accurate and intuitive manner possible. And it really is intuitive. I mean, it's like, not necessarily that you can remember all the rules, but when you look at every single rule, it makes perfect sense, and it fits with your sensibility. Even things like, oh gee, wait a minute, and this took some thinking. How come it costs me different amounts to, you know, turn in different directions? This sounds like trying to Blue Max or one of these airplane games where one of the heavy rotor planes turns better in one direction. Well, no, it's because the line was actually drilled to shift in one direction better. And of course the Prussians are different than the Austrians. So there's all these little complexities in there, but the overall thinking, you look at it all and you say, wow, I understand what's being done here. I understand the design decisions. And that's where this excels, mostly. I got a list of things that I want to go over where it kind of fails that paradigm, but anyway. This is where I get to fire at every hex. Almost no chance of hitting, especially at long range with artillery or 2 hexes with infantry. But, hey, you know, I do get to shoot at you all the time out there. Opportunity fire should be more penalized. It should have a penalty on it, though, I think, instead of, because directed fire, I don't know. More charts that are, you know, necessary to play, but on flimsy regular paper. The rules themselves. Okay, let's go to the counters first. The counters for me are a real problem. I mean, I overran my own unit. Didn't find out until I went to go put it in the bag. But they do look very similar. There's not a clear color scheme to distinguish them. On the backs there is, but on the front not so much. And I find that very distracting. I find there's a lot of information that can be put in a counter by color coding, etc., although that can be bad for people with color blindness, no question. That's missing on these. Add to that the gray and white informational counters. Almost everything in here, it's really hard to distinguish what you got. They're relying on darker shades of gray, but in some cases, printing hasn't made them correctly distinguishable. And from a distance, it just looks like there's all kind of white counters on things. Okay, let's go to the rule books. The standard rules, they're actually surprising, not that long. 25 pages, what? And 24 if you get rid of the cover sheets. And they're fairly well written. Not quite a style I'm used to. It's familiar to me from minis games, though. I've glanced at rules that have had this. I've read them, but never really absorbed them fully. So it's a little harder for me to absorb these rules. But to tell you the truth, the rules themselves aren't that bad, except that you really need to be looking at the charts and fiddling with some counters a little bit to kind of have the concept sink in if you're not, used to. Because it is almost a simulation of a minis game rather than directly trying to simulate the battle as best that a hex game can do. The abstractions that are available in a hex system are being kind of ignored, and it's almost like, well, let's make sure we can stretch those lines out like you can in minis, or, all these things that it's kind of hard to see when you actually start playing and fiddling around. You start seeing, well, it really isn't that weird, but it's hard to explain because of the situation. Okay. But I was surprised by how the rules were fairly readable and consistent. When I first looked at them, I thought, oh my god. But they're not that bad. And people have complained, well, at least about Labatt, I don't know so much about this, as being hard rules. It's not the rules. There are some ambiguities, though. And we see, I think we caught a couple of those in there. Nothing too huge. Okay. What about the scenario book? There are a couple pages of rules and a little bit of setup information, but most of it is historical commentary. I find that pleasant, but it's printed on kind of this parchment type stuff. There had to be a high expense to putting this thing out in this format, and you're paying that when you buy the game. It's a pleasant little surprise, especially if you're buying a used copy or something. But for a new copy, somebody who's this serious about it, wouldn't they be willing to look up most of the background, the historical background for the 7 Years' War, or already know it? On the other hand, the background for the battle itself, which is about half of this, is definitely of more interest. I mean, how many? I think that's perfectly fair game to go in depth about the prelude to the battle and the situation there. But going into kind of the causes of the 7 Years' War and the initial invasion of Saxony, although that does kind of set it up, I think more than a paragraph or two on that is a waste, to tell you the truth. Here's your explanation of what all the units and where on the counters it means. And here's a problem with the counters. You got important information on the front and back. It's different. You got to flip counters over to see what they do in combat, but they're routed if they're flipped over. So a lot of fiddling there. The system is even worse when you've got the artillery out there. Every hex that someone moves, if they're anywhere near the artillery, you got to roll the dice. Pain in the butt. Looking up all the movement, the formation changes, again, for me, it came down to, hey, close enough is good enough, and the hell with it, And I certainly made mistakes because of that. There's no question. So, for example, not looking up the rules regularly, and they're not that bad, and even though they don't have an index, they have a nice table of contents, and it's pretty comprehensive actually, and you can usually find what you're looking for. The format sticks in my mind rather well, unlike some companies, and especially the CDGs. Somehow they just have not learned how to, perhaps because their systems just aren't intuitive to me. And this is once I get it. I mean, I really get it. But it's still not necessarily pleasing to play. I got a certain perverse pleasure out of it. There were certainly points, especially yesterday, trying to put my head out of the fact that, oh yeah, I gotta go back to work. Well, I'm not sure which is more miserable, this or work, but, okay. What's wrong with this, though, in terms of the paradigm that it's trying to match? Beyond the, wow, it's almost unplayable to me, and I have a high tolerance for, a lot of fiddly crap in my games. ASL, that was tricky for me to deal with, but that's more subject matter not pleasing me. This is my subject. I love the idea of this period, even if I haven't found a game that pleases me in it. Same kind of feeling with Napoleonic, except I like where the NBS has gone. Maybe a little lighter than some of the games. But I liked where the NBS was originally, too, which I think was about as heavy as you can get. With this, I feel it's a fairly complex game, but the biggest problem is you just have to do so many little crappy things each in order to get anything to go. You want to make a charge? Well, you got to roll your initiative for your leader if he's out of command. Okay, no big deal there. You got to roll for each unit after you move it to see whether or not it can charge. Then after it charges, you can make a counter-charge attempt, and you got to roll that for the defender. And these are all percentile dice, so it's not, like you can roll them all at once or something necessarily. And they're also pulsed. There's action in between. And then, if the defender failed that, it looks like he has to make another roll to see if he stands. He might actually just rout from it. Okay, let's go on. What's missing? Ammo depletion. Something this detailed? It's covered in the special events for the scenario. And that's kind of important because there were times when ammo was low in sectors. But I don't know, to me it feels like something this detailed should have that supply flow of ammo going on in it. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm used to it in my Civil War games, and I find it kind of odd that there's no tracking of ammunition here. Here's another one. There's multiple unit charge. Oh yeah, when Cav charges, it runs up into another unit. Okay, if it's not a zone of control, it can keep going, but it can't hit that other unit. And if it runs into a zone of control, it just stops. No charge through in this. I'm used to even simpler tactical minis games on this topic having charge throughs. 20-minute turns, it happened. Why is that not here? Why can you not go through another unit? Well, there's a possibility through the special events that you could get another activation or something. It doesn't seem to be a forced march. Maybe I'm missing something. I didn't really look too hard for it, but I don't remember seeing it. And to go with that, there don't seem to be any kind of stragglers. Certainly, any battle had stragglers on the field. Even if it's just irrecoverable stragglers that I take casualties from that forced march or whatever, I take that as a trade-off or disorder from a forced march. But it's not there. Individual commands. I mean, a single counter has its morale state in the sense that if it's taking if it takes over 50% losses, it gets a plus 10 to its effectiveness, which is bad. But there's some fairly large cohesive units at the command level that aren't wings, that aren't, although maybe wings should too, that you get the feeling that they're more integrated since they all move together or whatever, and they should have their own morale. Again, maybe I'm just taking my tastes from things like Civil War Brigade series, Terrible Swift Sword, Great Battles of American Civil War, Napoleonic games and like, but it just feels like the larger unit doesn't have any cohesion. It doesn't bother me Yeah, it does. I was going to say, well, see, if you attach it, you have this attachment and detachment. I never really used it except with independent units. But you can kind of create bigger commands. And the question I have is how much that would affect things. But two units can combine and make one better unit if they're both counters of the same unit, not just command, but actually more specifically specific regiments of the same brigade. I'm not sure. Anyway, those are a few little kind of niggling points, but given what this is trying to do, I find it odd that none of them are really modeled in the same level of detail that, for example, turning your formation is. All right, mixed view on it. Again, I got kind of a kick out of it. It's not totally miserable for me. I'm going to go with a 5 on it, almost with a, I really am impressed with the attempt of effort here, but I feel like I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt at that. If you, for any reason, think that any game, if you've ever used the word fiddly, stay away from this. Yeah, I mean, seriously, I've played a lot of war games, and the only one in my head that's ever bothered me in this particular way that I can think of is, well, I can think of two. One is Ney versus Wellington, and very sadly, I just bought Wellington's Victory, which is sort of its bigger brother. I don't think that's as bad. I've just had this mental block about it. The other one, and I'm hoping Wellington's Victory, gives me wood or something. I've learned to like both because I got it at a very good price. The other is the naval combat in, well, no, now I can think of a third one, but recently in La Grande Guerre, that, with all of its die rolling and everything, wow, that's annoying. Not at the same level, and there's so much in the game to make up for it. Another one is the modern version of Mayfair's War in the Falklands. Again, all this die rolling. But neither of them, neither the La Grande Guerre naval combat nor the War in the Falklands game, particularly have anything to recommend them for that for that one portion of LGG, and for all of the War of the Falklands. I have to say, I just wish there was a different system. For this, it's going to be tough. Because all that die rolling is really, the philosophy of the game, and it does lead towards that intuitive aspect of, yeah, I see exactly what's going on here. Oh, I got shot, not in the hex that was just the best hex that my opponent could pick for opportunity firing, a la Squad Leader, but I got shot in every hex, and I got hit in this one. Okay, I think it's going to be quite, I had these thoughts of, I'm going to do the next one. Well, those are masochistic thoughts, and yes, I will probably get to them eventually, but I've got a lot of things that I want to do a lot more than torture myself with this again. So I'm going to do something light right off the bat, but I think I'm aiming towards my next heavy thing, or heavier thing. I don't know how much I want to play Europa Universalis, but I've got so many damn games piled up here. So I think the next heavy thing might well be SPQR, which is punched and clipped and everything good about it. Otherwise, I really don't know. 17 Year of the Hangman's another possibility. 1777. That also is punched and clipped. I can't think of anything else big that I've got that way. I've got a lot of big things that I've... Yeah. Enemy at the Gates is Punch and Clip, but you ain't seeing that for a while. I think I'm getting Europa Universalis on the table before that.